5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I farted.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely didn't.
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 64 of Rank and Review, Ghosts Volume 5. Returning guest Matthew Risling comes to discuss 6 films on the subjects of ghosts. And yes, if that sounds familiar, we have been here 4 times before, and we may yet be here again. So thank you for coming back for this exciting installment of Rank and Review, and I certainly hope you enjoy it. But also please go into the podcast as usual, anticipating that there may indeed be some coarse language and some spoilers for the films discussed. Please find Rank and Review at rankandreview.ca. Have a look at the website, and you can look at some of the episodes in our back catalog. You can also find Rank and Review on iTunes and on Facebook. And if you could do me a favor, your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons, just do me a solid and spread the word on the podcast to your other movie friends, because I would just love to get an audience for this podcast going. So, without further ado, welcome to episode 64 of Rank and Review. Welcome to Rank and Review, and welcome to my returning guest Matthew Risling for your 4th Ghost podcast with me.
Yep, number 4 of Ghosts so far.
Yeah.
Only the 3rd one with the Poltergeist movie, but 4 Ghosts movies.
And we thought we were done with Poltergeist, but now there's this damn remake that we're going to have to deal with.
I know, I totally wanted to do the creature feature, and I mean, I gotta kill off the Poltergeist franchise, somebody should have done years ago.
Just when you think that you're out, they pull you back in. So I don't know. I mean, we've done this several times before. I mean, I could ask you, what is your interest in ghosts, or are you tiring of the subject matter yet after this many?
I feel like if you have any repeat listeners, they know of my interest in ghosts, and my trauma from the Poltergeist movie when I was 7. But yeah, I just wanted to do this because actually now this is a Christmas tradition for me. This is the 3rd consecutive Christmas that I've just basically hung out by myself and watched ghost movies for your fucking podcast.
Well, I appreciate you doing it. Do you find that you're worn out of watching all of these ghost movies? Like, let's do some basic math. What's 6 times 4? 24?
I perhaps would have been, except for the first 2 that you had me do were by far the worst lists.
Okay.
So, I mean, this was not a tedious list at all. I thought it would be far more tedious than it was.
We're agreed then that, like, although some of the movies in this list is problematic, that we still have a fairly, watchable group of ghost movies.
Yeah, I would say, which actually makes it kind of difficult for me to rank.
Yeah.
Which means I may not be taking the belt this time because so many of them are sort of tied with each other in the low Bs.
I think that you got to look at those lists. I think you need to find one where the bottom and the top are really obvious, and that sort of takes like a third of the list is taken care of right there.
Well, I would be super surprised if we don't have the same top and bottom movie on this list.
Well, we shall see.
Although I would love to hear your justification if we don't have the same. I guess time will tell.
Well, we've been having some more and more scrappy episodes on Rank and Review, so time will tell.
Yeah, I kind of want to get into a fight with you on this. It feels like you're kind of going round and round with your other guests, and you and I have been a little bit too collegial with each other.
We'll find something. Even if we agree on a movie, we'll disagree about why it's good or bad.
Yeah, let's do that.
The 6 movies that we are going to discuss, we have a big supernatural blockbuster from a couple years ago, The Conjuring, from James Wan, who created Saw and Insidious. We have a telling of a quite interesting, actually, gothic-themed novel, The Woman in Black, starring Harry Potter. We have Poltergeist 3. I know we've been waiting for this one. You know, the circle closes.
What happens with Kane? People want to know.
From Alexander Aja, we have Mirrors, which is a remake of a South Korean film, I want to say, called Into the Mirror.
Yep.
And we have another remake, The House on Haunted Hill. And we're going to wrap it up with the television epic, Stephen King's Rose Red. Is there anything...
Hey,
what? Sorry, what? No.
I'm just wondering, was Rose Red a big deal when it came out? Because I had never heard of it. But
It was a big deal in that it was written exclusively for television. There's no sort of book source or short story source other than stuff that he ripped off, as we'll talk about when we get to the review. But it was sort of a big deal in that this was something that you could only see on network television. This was Stephen King's big badass haunted house movie. So
okay. I guess we'll talk more about that later.
Agreed. Is there anything you want to say before we jump into this?
No, let's jump straight in.
Let's do it.
We have to get out of here.
That's not gonna help.
This thing has latched itself to your family.
Father, we never seen nothing like this.
I'm coming with you.
No way. I can't lose you.
There's a lady in a dirty nightgown that I see in my dreams. She's standing in front of my mom's bed. Do you want to see him?
Yeah?
When the music stops, you see him in the mirror standing behind you.
So, one of the biggest horror hits in recent memory is how we're going to start out this episode. It's called The Conjuring. It's directed by James Wan, and he brought us Saw and he brought us Insidious. And apparently he's just done one of the Fast and the Furious movies, which I haven't really seen any of those, believe it or not.
No, I'm hoping to get through my entire life without seeing any movie about somebody that is fast and or furious.
Well, we'll see. It may be harder than you think. So, yeah, it was a monster hit, and it's definitely got this retro ghost thriller vibe, and it's got this horror movie sort of pastiche thing where it's based on a true story.
Yeah, and it's a remarkable movie in that it's a rare ghost movie to get an R rating, and it got an R rating for having no nudity, minimal violence, no drug use, nothing that tends to get movies R ratings.
Right.
It just got an R rating on the strength of how scary it is, or
Yeah.
how scary it is in parts.
And I guess I would agree. I mean, I don't know that I would say kids should watch The Conjuring. But I guess to open up, it concerns this paranormal investigative couple, the Warrens, who are asked to come look at this farmhouse, which a family has recently moved into, and all sorts of ghostly shenanigans are going on. Do you think that The Conjuring lives up to the hype?
Yes and no, I suppose. It's a good question because this movie is alternately excellent and pretty good. I don't think that there are moments in this that are certainly weaker than other moments. There's nothing about it that I really think is bad. And I didn't really see a lot of the hype. I sort of peripherally knew that it existed. And when I saw it, I was actually quite impressed by how horrific it was in some parts, particularly towards the first half. And then it never really got bad, but it felt like it sort of started to peter out in some ways, or got quite familiar in some ways.
Yeah. I will agree with you that I think that the first half of the movie is way more entertaining and way more frightening than the second. And I think that's because the deeper into the movie, the more either worn out by the familiarity or the just more directly familiar these scenes to become. It sort of culminates in an exorcism scene that I've seen so many times, just within my podcast, you know. But what
Well, yeah, and one of the notes I have about it is everything it did pretty well, but there were so many familiar tropes, right?
Yeah.
Like it didn't really bring anything unique into the genre, but it just had so many of the things that you would expect to see. So, you know, it has the dog barking at the house, it has the spooky doll, it has the spooky kid who seems to be having an imaginary friend, you know, the old house, you name something that you would expect to find in this movie, and it's probably in this movie.
Stuff so well worn it shouldn't work. And I remember saying a similar thing when Adrian Cook and I reviewed Insidious. It was like, you're using a bunch of ingredients that we've seen a dozen times before effectively. And I think that is like a skill, because like, again, all these scares shouldn't be as effective as they are in this movie, but like they're just very well executed. But I think it's the build that works and the payoff that doesn't as much.
Yeah, what I found worked really well is when the director sort of reeled himself back a little bit, or maybe reined himself in a bit would be a better way to say it. They had one of, for me, the scariest scenes that I've seen in recent years, where it's two little girls in a room. The audience is pretty sure that there are ghosts by now. And one of the girls sees something in a shadow in the corner, and she's walking towards it. And like the door is halfway open, I think, which is casting a shadow. And she is seeing something in it, but most of the shot is her sister reacting to what she's seeing. So as the audience, we're just seeing this girl's face, and the amount of terror on her face, and just the way that the movie sells it. It's so minimal. It's done without any special effects. One of my other notes is throughout the movie, the ambient music for the most part is pretty conservative, so it's not too bombastic, like get scared now. Yeah. And so when you have these moments where it's just the shadows and it's just the actors, and they did a good job of casting the kids in this family, I thought that worked extremely well.
And that can totally blow it for you. If you have a weak kid performance, if we don't believe the kids, that's not gonna... With the jeopardy, a lot of it comes from the children, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but you could juxtapose that with one of what I think is kind of the weaker moments in it. It begins with this odd, almost a little vignette about these college kids that have a haunted doll.
Correct. Annabelle.
And the thing about Annabelle is it could be really spooky. Haunted dolls can be really terrified, but this one looked like whoever the props person was tasked with building an evil-looking doll. So it just looked too grotesque. It looked like a monster doll toy.
On the nose. It's what you would expect an evil haunted doll to look like.
Yeah.
If you went to a store to buy a mock-up of an evil demonic doll, that's what it would look like.
Yeah, and because it looked so much like the evil demonic doll that it should look like... the thing that makes dolls creepy, the thing about porcelain dolls, why they are so often creepy, is because of how neutral their expressions are and just how blank, and they've got those beady little eyes that kind of follow you. You don't need to make it look like a demon doll. Like, your audience will get the idea. And this is something that the director is conscious of in his better moments, that the sort of less is more works so well in this. And then when he wants to do the more is more, I find it sort of kick me out from time to time.
I mean, Annabelle got her own movie. I just sort of found the prologue, I mean, it was fine. It just seemed a little bit needless. Like, I don't know why we spent that time on the doll. If you wanted to set up the Warrens, which you obviously need to do, I guess I get that. But I don't get that as your entry point, you know.
Well, and it also set up, I think, one of the most pointless fake scares at the end. So at some point, towards the end of the movie, the doll, Annabelle... I don't know if I should say comes to life, but starts doing spooky things. because the Warrens, who are these supposedly real-world exorcist types, have this room full of creepy souvenirs. These souvenirs that we know are still evil, so they can only stay in the Warrens' house because they're too powerful for other people. So at some point, the doll gets out and starts chasing the Warrens' little girl around their house, and then whatever, the main plot resolves itself. And then it has one of those fake-out endings where it seems like everything's fine, but it doesn't fade to black in credits, so we know something's going to happen. And then it ends with this shot of Annabelle with the music to indicate that that doll is still alive and evil. Well, we already knew it was alive and evil. That's why it was in the cabinet.
And they were just selling tickets for Annabelle, and it had nothing to do with The Conjuring. Much like this whole conversation is like a complete aside to the thrust of the story. My point is that the whole side story of the doll didn't need to be there. It seems like a built-in advertisement for their next movie. You know,
Yeah.
But that's the only thing that, like, one of the real notches I'll take against it. I gotta say, I love the cast, and I for some reason the fact that it's set in the 70s makes it feel scarier to me because so many great horror movies were just made in the 70s.
Yeah, that worked for me, and I thought actually it had just the perfect amount of star power, where it has some recognizable character actors, Lily Taylor,
Ron Livingston. Yeah, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga play the Warrens.
They're a high enough level that they're obviously professional actors,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not like... I mean, I think one of the first movies I reviewed had Harrison Ford, and I just couldn't see him as anybody but Indiana Jones, right? Like, it's none of these A-list celebrities that you're either the killer or...
You're there
gonna
for
be
a
fine.
reason, yeah. Well, I think that one of my issues is the fact that, like, why did they really necessarily have to pretend that this was based on a true story? I mean, I have a personal axe to grind. I'm a little bit of a skeptical person because I used to be very much a believer, you know? I used to be Mulder, and I've sort of eclipsed over to Scully in a lot of ways.
Oh, incidentally, sorry to interrupt.
Go
One
ahead.
of the things that I thought was really strong about this movie was there was no Scully character.
Not one.
Right? The house is obviously haunted, and we don't have Ron Livingston saying, "I don't believe in ghosts,"
Yeah.
even though I just saw this horrible apparition come out of the mirror or something
There's
like
no
that.
shrink who thinks that she's psychotic and abusing the children. There's none of that side. And that's a very familiar, revisited thing, too.
In fact, keep listening. It might come up in one of our later
just might.
reviews.
It just might. But what I wanted to say about the Warrens is that I think that this movie almost... Well, they're heroes. Like, these guys are going to be the center of this Conjuring franchise. And, I mean, I think if anybody looks into them a little bit, the fact that you can go to their haunted museum and take a tour and see the Annabelle doll for whatever, $50 a ticket, you know. The fact that the woman who said that this place was haunted has just published thousands and thousands of pages of rambling craziness that is inconsistent and, just obviously not something written by somebody who's got all of the pieces to the puzzle, you know? It doesn't have to be based on a true story. And the fact that they're hanging it on it sort of, in a way, rubs me the wrong way. I would rather this was just another spooky sort of ghost story that they decided, yeah, let's use that 70s aesthetic to our favor, you know? I just wish that it wasn't based on a true story because, let's be real, it fucking isn't. It's a horror movie. It's a story.
Well,
that's why we like it, because it's fantasy.
Well, and speaking of overused tropes, based on a true story, it feels like somebody got that in their head once, that would make a movie scarier. It doesn't matter if it's based on a true story or not.
It shouldn't play into it. But
I mean, if it's scary, it's scary. If it's not, it's not.
But I can't sleep at night knowing that the legend of Hell House could be true, Matthew.
Yeah, there's a possibility.
Anyway, I mean, I like The Conjuring, but I think I like it less than everybody else does. I mean, it's good. It's solid. It's a worthy horror movie watch. But, I mean, I'm not going to compare it with The Exorcist. I'm not going to get too out of hand, you know?
But when, again, I come back to when it works, it works. So I mentioned already the little girl's reaction to what her sister sees in the dark. There's also that really horrifying game of blind man's bluff that they're playing.
The clapping game is wonderful.
And that happens twice, and both of the times the payoff is really strong. And I mean, you know what it's going to be. They moved into this haunted house, and one of them has a blindfold on and they're trying to find whoever is playing with them, and the people that are playing can just clap, and they sort of walk around the house trying to find them. And you know at one point something's going to be clapping that isn't one of them, and something really scary is going to happen. And even knowing it, the way they execute it, with that little kid jumping out of the darkness and clapping his hands, like that was, even seeing it coming a mile away, it really got me.
It's chilling. It's chilling. And I think that is James Wan's kind of gift. He, like, I've said it before, we know exactly how he's going to scare us, and yet he scares us. And I think that's that's definitely a talented filmmaker.
Yeah, Lily Taylor in the basement for the first time.
Yeah. They kind of spoiled that scare in the trailer, but it's still just an amazing, amazing moment. And again, all of this stuff happens in the first 40 minutes. And I think that is where the strength of the movie is and what makes it a totally worthy watch. It's on the wall. I've seen it a few times. I will see it more. You know, I like it. I endorse it. But a lot of people, it's sort of like it was a revitalization of horror. It was this decade's horror masterpiece. I'm hoping that we haven't yet seen it. You know, I'm hoping that horror masterpiece is still out there waiting for me.
Well, and it did have, like, towards the end, you already mentioned that there was an overly familiar exorcism. What you didn't mention it also is how cloyingly sweet it was, that there was this photograph when the family had been on vacation and were treated to these, like, very saccharine flashbacks, and that was the perfect day, we stopped at the coast and we were all so happy, and then the exorcist is like, remember that day, remember how happy you were, and then there's this stupid music and we see that stupid day at the beach again, and that certainly didn't belong in there for me. And it was kind of indicative of when the movie overdid it in kind of ugly ways.
But it didn't spoil the meal. I would still recommend it.
Yeah, I would say it was well worth my time. It's a good one to watch with people that are scared easily, because it's fun to watch their expressions as well. When it works, it really works well, which is something that can't necessarily be said. Certainly not of all the movies I reviewed on your podcast, but not even all of the movies from this week.
Yeah. And as a jump scare factory, I mean, like, it made me jump. I mean, I'm pretty inured to them, and like I said, I can see them coming, but I still jump, so kudos for that.
During afternoon tea, there's a shift in the air. A bone-trembling chill that tells you she's there. There are those who believe the whole town is cursed, but the house in the marsh is by far the worst. What she wants is unknown, but she always comes back. The spectre of darkness. The woman in black.
Okay, so before we get into The Woman in Black, I've got to admit some personal baggage that I'm going to be bringing into this.
You have a crush on Harry Potter.
I totally am in love with Daniel Radcliffe. No, that's actually not the case. But I am kind of in love with the source material of this. I am familiar with the novel, which was published in 1983, but is a very sort of throwback gothic ghost story, because I saw a stage play of it, performed actually by good friends of mine, that told sort of the base story. And it rang familiar to me because I remembered as a kid seeing this BBC production of a movie. I didn't remember then that it was The Woman in Black, but it was very much this story. I keep on running into The Woman in Black, which, if you know the context of the story, is actually super fucking creepy. But it's weird because this is the most conventional of ghost movies in a lot of ways. Like, there's a jump scare involving birds early on, and I almost like, damn it, you know? And yeah, it's centered around Daniel Radcliffe, who's trying to prove to the world that he's more than just Harry Potter, right? And I feel sort of again, like we talked about in The Conjuring, a lot of very familiar tropes throughout this movie. But I also still found it quite frightening. So I thought this might be one that we would disagree on, because as it turns out, despite my obvious flaws that I see present in the movie, I'm actually quite a fan of The Woman in Black.
I think I'm probably less of a fan of it than you are, but I did think it was quite good. Similar, I suppose, to The Conjuring, there were a lot of familiar tropes, as you've already said. In some ways, some of them get handled with a bit more of a light touch. For example, we've got the second movie in a row that begins with little kids playing with creepy dolls.
Mm-hmm.
But this time we actually have creepy dolls that look creepy.
Those dolls, all of the toys in this movie are just, they could have just done a series of shots of those fucking toys and it would be a creepy movie. Damn. But yeah, but you were saying, yeah, we open basically with 3 children committing suicide.
Yeah.
That's where we start.
And in a really surreal way, they're all having a tea party, and then they seem to be, I mean, all little girls are creepy, obviously, but they just seem to be no creepier than 3 little girls having a tea party would be in any other situation. And then they all just stand up and walk out the window, or walk towards the window and jump out the window.
Yeah.
And then we hear a parent screaming in the background, and that's how the movie starts.
And that's when we get into this really creepy sort of ghosty curse that goes on. I think part of the thing about this movie is that it does target children. Maybe that hits sort of a soft spot for me. The curse of this evil spirit, and depending on what interpretation you see of this, if you see her, it means a child's going to die, or necessarily, in some interpretations, that your child is going to die, just by seeing this vision of this awful woman in this black funeral garb. It's a creepy idea, and I don't know if I feel, we'll get to the ending, I don't feel if I like the extent that we went to it in this version of the events. I think in the original BBC teleplay version that I saw, it ends just with him seeing the woman in black and her pointing at him and screaming, and we just know what it means, and that
I
was
actually
enough.
didn't mind the way this ended. It had a little bit of a twist, as ghost movies are wont to do. Quite a few of the ghost movies we watched for this have pretty familiar fake-out endings.
Mm-hmm.
Conjuring, of course, we'll get into some of the other ones. This one, I actually liked it. Let's talk about the plot first, and then we can talk about how it ends.
Daniel Radcliffe is a very young lawyer who has recently lost his wife and is not dealing with it well, and he has a young son that he's sort of his little neglectorino right now as we start him, and he is sent to help settle the affairs of this estate in this creepy as shit Eel Marsh house, a house that actually gets enclosed by the tidal flow every evening. So if you get too scared of the woman in black, you don't have the option of flight. you're locked in by the environment. And yeah, he has to spend his days in this sort of musty house full of, dead people's furniture and go through all of the paperwork and finances and sort out the estate. And whilst looking into that, stumbles upon the woman in black and the mystery surrounding her.
And we also have a lot of kids killing themselves.
And the town folks, just generally, that with the exception of Kieran Hines, who's a really good Irish actor, the townsfolk are just immediately not a fan of him, his presence. They don't like him. They don't like him around. He just means bad news. And they seem to be right because, calamity has followed his arrival. So that's the basic sort of setup plot of The Woman in Black.
I think almost all of the movies from this podcast also involve a protagonist that is fallen on hard times financially. Mm-hmm. He needs to be doing... What is he doing exactly with her estate?
Well, they're just trying to settle the estate. There's nobody in possession of the house or anything like that. So he's sort of basically collecting the documents and sorting things out, trying to figure out if there is a distant relative to contact or what to do with it.
Right, and he's in a situation where he's got to sort it well and quickly, or else he loses his job. So he's got that
he has to prove
financial
himself
desperation.
as worthy. Yeah. it's weird because it confronts you with a lot of scenes that would be frustrating, where people will yell at the movie screen, where you know, a character hears a noise in the middle of the night that is inexplicable, and then goes and very slowly investigates it, you know? And it should just be intensely frustrating. And I don't know if it's just the context and the production values, because that house just... I'm not, like I said, I'm a skeptical person, and I wouldn't want to sleep in that house, man.
No, I mean, the scenery does, or the setting does so much of the work for this movie. And it doesn't even do it in a shitty way where it becomes overly reliant on it, as might happen in Rose Red later.
Maybe.
It's good. It's the right kind of house with the right kind of creaks and just enough scary stuff to keep the tension up. It's the kind of house where obviously there should be a ghost when the marsh floods the roads out and you're just stuck there.
Yeah. They don't even bother putting that in the real estate advertisement. It's just understood. Yeah, evil spirit within. Totally. That's why you buy that house.
Yeah. I didn't actually like the movie quite as much as you, it sounds like, though.
Right.
I had a big problem with the protagonist, who his wife is dead, and he just walks around mopey all the time, and he sees his little precocious kid's drawing of him, and it's like, you know, a stick figure with a big frowny face, and like,
Right.
"Oh, Daddy, that's you. You're always so sad, Daddy." And then Harry Potter walks around, "Oh, I'm so sad. Everything's so mopey." And like, so when he's in the house by himself and we don't know what's going on and the ghost might kill him, like, I don't really mind that. He's becoming such an annoying presence. The supporting character, what did you say his name was?
Kieran Hines. He's the one friendly... He and his wife are like the two friendly people in town as far as we see.
Yeah, he's a guy that I could latch on to, you know, an hour and a half into the movie when they finally introduce him. Another thing is, I think you could say that the pacing is slow to build up suspense. I actually think the pacing is a little bit off, especially at first. I find it takes too long to really get into it, and you don't have a character to latch onto. So, I mean, I mentioned that I don't think they're coasting off of the fact that the setting is so spooky. I think they are coasting off of the fact that they've got Daniel Radcliffe, and they just assume that because he's the protagonist, we will care what happens to him. But he doesn't sell the character at all to me.
He is very, very, very young looking. There's a little bit of a Leonardo DiCaprio thing that I feel with him, and that I don't think he's a bad actor, but he's always got this quality where he kind of looks like a kid to me. And
yeah, I didn't mind that so much. I mean, he was old enough to have a son that age. It's early 20th century. They were popping him out pretty young.
By the time you're in your early 20s, you've lived a long, hard life in a lot of respects. That's sort of like the whole cowboy world, where I don't mind seeing babyface cowboys because a lot of them, you know, were. But yeah. I understand that it wasn't unheard of to have somebody so young have such a large responsibility. I think the problem of Radcliffe's casting is, unfortunately, and this would really irritate him, the fact that he is Harry Potter to so many people. That it's just an out for the movie. I think that, you know, give this movie 10 years, and when people just don't care about Harry Potter as much or Daniel Radcliffe as much, and he's just another protagonist in a ghost movie, he fits that template role. It's so many horror movies start with somebody having a terrible tragedy in their life, and they're in a terrible place, and this supernatural adventure sort of is set on that precipice, right? So many movies, some child has died, some wife has died, and we meet the widow, and they're already in a down place when the supernatural strikes. It may be a flaw, but it's an almost a horror movie archetype.
I don't mind that so much. I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying about having to see him as Harry Potter, because I haven't actually seen any of the Harry Potter movies, so I didn't... You
were still distracted by him,
obviously. Well, I know that he is Harry Potter, but I could let that go. But yeah, he was just too mopey and too droopy. So it would even be possible to keep starting with a little bit of desperation as far as your job goes or your finances. That's very common. We're going to see it again and again. That's okay. A traumatic loss of a loved one. that's fine because ghost movies are psychological. They're so often about loss or something being missing from your life. That's
About
okay.
death. Yeah.
But he was just so droopy dog that after a while it was hard for me to really
Sympathize.
identify with him at all.
Well, I thought the thing that would be the fuck moment for you was the ending. He solves the murder mystery, or the mystery of the curse, or so he thinks, and he's reunited with his son, and he's happy to see his son, and he hugs his son, and everything's going to be A-okay. But no, his son is lured onto the train tracks, and he runs to save him, and they're hit by the train, and it was all for naught, right? I guess he was right to mope around, because he just wasn't going to be happy until he got his wife back. And the fact that the movie frames a happy ending around a child and his father being run over by a train is more optimistic than I think.
No, I liked it. I thought that was something that I hadn't seen before, and I wasn't entirely sure how to read it, so I'm curious to get your opinion. But so the woman in black, her child had died, and he sort of reunited their corpses and buried them together, and so now they can be together in the afterlife. And then, his kid's at the train station, wanders onto the tracks. He follows his kid onto the tracks. They both get hit by a train, and then they get reunited with his wife, all together in the afterlife. And it felt to me like that was a weird thank you from the woman in black.
She didn't keep them there. They wasn't trapped there, or wasn't part of that curse. They were sort of, I guess, free to go. And I guess she was giving Daniel Radcliffe what he wanted. He gave her family back, so she gave him his family back.
Yeah, it seemed like oddly magnanimous, and sort of like I mean, if you're an evil ghost, and you want to do something nice, how do you say thank you? It's like when my cat brings me a dead rabbit or something. I don't necessarily want the rabbit, but he thinks that that's a nice thing. I kind of felt like
it's the thought that counts.
Yeah. But then the last shot was the woman in black being very menacing. So then I wasn't sure, is she evil, and did she accidentally do him a favor?
They were reopening the Hammer Horror Studios for this, and they wanted maybe to franchise it. Hence, perhaps someday
because there is a sequel.
Perhaps someday us talking about Woman in Black too.
Yes.
The one thing I wanted to mention quickly, because we're pretty deep into this and we haven't, is the jump scares in the movie.
Okay.
Because I think there's some fucking good ones. And again, much like with the Conjuring, they shouldn't work. Him looking through that little ornament chime jewelry box thing, and her appearing in a vision behind him, and just... I thought some of the jump scares in the house genuinely worked. And I just wanted to throw a few points up in its favor. I know I come in a little bit biased because I love the source material and I love, seeing the play. And I have my own personal baggage. I came in liking it. I probably was going to give it a C- sight unseen almost, because I like this sort of type of story. But as I say it, I know it's a very, very familiar one.
Rage.
You think she's able to create some sort of mass hysteria? It's more like mass hypnosis. Oh, it's a great act. Carol Ann creates the fire and you feed it.
You made this happen. You made her talk about him. You made her remember him. He was lost. Can you feel the cold? He's devouring the heat, the energy.
I'm going to count to 3, Carol Ann. And when I snap my fingers, you will awaken. 1, 2, 3.
My memory of Poltergeist 3, even from when it came out and me being a fan of the franchise, was that I hated it. That's where I start. When I revisited the movie, it came in a package with part 2. I didn't come in with any kind of expectation but to be basically making fun of the thing. And I don't have a lot of positive things to say. I'm not gonna lie. But
I've got something positive to say. Maybe a little bit of a Dutch compliment here, but I don't think it was the worst Poltergeist movie I've seen. I do think it was better than Poltergeist 2.
Wow.
Well, no. Okay, I liked it more than I liked Poltergeist 2.
The reason we like it is probably more accidental than on purpose, though, is I think what we're getting at, right?
Well, one of the things that I thought that captured my imagination about it a little bit when I was younger, I didn't see it until I was in my maybe mid-teenage years. It takes place in a building where Tom Skerritt is a building manager, and the kids, a young Lara Flynn Boyle, although because she had 80s hair and makeup, she actually looked kind of older than she did subsequently.
Weird.
Because everybody in the 80s looked old. But her and Carol Ann running around the building, I liked the idea of having the freedom to have that whole space be a space that you could run around in. So like when the kids, the parents are at a party and the kids break into the swimming pool and they've just got the run of the place. I liked that as a premise. It seemed like it would be a fun thing. Kind of like, and this is, I'm not going to compare it to Dawn of the Dead in too many ways, but the same as having freedom of running around and having a mall all to yourself, having the apartment building all to yourself. Always seemed like it would be fun to me.
Yeah, there's a sequence when Lara Flynn Boyle gets her hand to the keys to the kingdom, and she can basically access anything, the stores, the swimming pool, the whatever. The premise is actually one of the problems. Carol Ann is inexplicably farmed off to her aunt, who doesn't seem that fond of her, frankly, and while she's going to this school for gifted children. So the rest of the family is completely absent from the movie.
Sorry to interrupt. Weirdly, the aunt seems to like her more at the beginning, but then at about the halfway point seems to not love her anymore, which becomes a major plot point. And I think they had to write that in or really play that up. So for the climax, she could say, I will sacrifice myself for you, or whatever it is that she does. So they had to make it seem
I love you.
Yeah, and they had to make that seem like it had stakes, but it didn't make sense because when we're first introduced to this family, they seem to really be into each other and they all love each other. So
it's a weird misstep of the show. Like, it should have been awkward. I think that she should have been having a weird icy relationship right across the board. Maybe that would have helped it. But basically, the villain from Part 2 returns, even though the actor who played him is now dead, and it's clearly just a boogeyman wearing a boogeyman mask at this point. To claim Carol Ann and get her to lead them to the other side. The poltergeists are back. I'm with you in that I like the idea of moving it up to a high-rise building. My grandparents, when I was a kid, lived in a high-rise apartment building, which I did spend a lot of time running around in being a little brat. But there is something creepy about the fact that it's a hive. It's kind of a weird used place, and there's ghostly howls from the elevator shaft and the stairwells. And I think that it's kind of an untapped potential for creepy. I don't know that they made it creepy. I think that this is a little bit it's so 80s and pastel and pretty and mall-like that I didn't get much atmosphere. I got when they were trying for atmosphere. I kind of liked some of the business with the mirrors and the supernatural stuff going in the background that initially our characters don't even notice. But I just like things that they're trying, but I just don't think it's very successful at doing any of it. But I was surprised when I was watching it again.
Execution wasn't good in almost anything that they tried to do.
But I found myself just sort of in a weird way, like not liking it, but rooting for them while I was watching the movie. I don't know how to explain it. This is not a positive review, and it's just... There's a bunch of interesting ideas here, and they were taking swings. I just don't think they were getting too many hits.
Well, and Poltergeist 2 seemed in so many ways trying to rehash Poltergeist 1, and I guess this is the thing about trilogies, particularly when they were impromptu trilogies, because I think when they made the first one, they didn't think it would become a three-parter.
One and done.
So the second one seemed like they were just trying to redo the first one and capture that magic, which they did not.
Yeah.
And for the third one, they tried some new things. And I like that they tried. When you were saying like it was kind of fun to watch them run around the building and you were sort of rooting for them, it felt in some ways more like an adventure movie than a horror movie.
Correct.
And that, it was fun in its way.
And these were...
So like I said, I didn't see it until I was in my teens, but they kept playing it on, I don't know what, Channel 40 or something. It was just one of those movies that was on every other Sunday night. So I watched it a ton of times when I was like 16 to 18. And there's a certain familiarity and residual enjoyment that I kind of got from it. But if you were seeing this for the first time, you would not like it unless you kind of came in with some pre-existing emotional attachment.
It's weird because it's in this strange category of family horror movies. It is a horror movie, but it's meant to be enjoyed by the whole family. So there's it has to keep a certain level of PG. It can give you some boo, but it can't give you any real violence. It can get you to the line of something really ugly, but it's not going to give you something really ugly because it's still for everyone. And I think that's where I was going with that misstep of the relationship with the family. The fact that Carol Ann's family are absent, it almost because of the Spielbergian bond that they established, we have to assume that the rest of her family is either fucking dead or that some horrible worm has turned where that their daughter has become such a psychic magnet for bad spiritual energy that they just fucking pawned her off.
Well, they never do a great job of explaining this, but
No,
I
they
believe
don't.
what happens is she gets sent to Chicago to live with her aunt and her family because there's a school that they want her to go to with this psychiatrist that's good at working with creepy kids. Segue into the psychiatrist character.
Yes.
So I think it wasn't that her family didn't want her around, which is something that her aunt is going to say later, that her sister was trying to pawn Carol Ann off on her, but that was never the case. She was going to this special school, and it wasn't a special school even necessarily for kids that are troubled. It was just for kind of psychologically damaged kids, I guess.
Right. I don't know. It just didn't, because of the level of love that they'd established within the family. I didn't buy that they would just give her away and we wouldn't hear from them at all. There wouldn't even be a scene where she was on the phone with her mother, or the fact that the grandmother died in the previous movie, which was presumably just a few months ago or not that long ago. Carol Ann hasn't aged that much since part 2, right? So like her aunt doesn't seem too fazed by the fact that her mother just died. And, her mother was a psychic, we found out in the previous movie, so she must have some knowledge that this ghost business exists. And there's all sorts of problems.
It would have been so easy to solve, too, to give her aunt a problem with her, because you could say, like, the grandmother and then Carol Ann's mother were both psychics in the last one. So you could say they had a special bond that the younger sister always felt left out of. So she might have a little bit of residual bitterness or something. Like, it wouldn't have taken any time just to do something like that.
But they just didn't bother. They were just like hoping, just let us go. We have Carol Ann, that's all we need. The rest of the family, whatever. They died in a car accident or whatever. And and that's the thing. They tried to keep the vibe at first of this is still that lovey-dovey family. And that worked against the story they were trying to tell. There should have been tension, and there wasn't.
And we're going to, speaking of lovey-dovey family, segue into something that I was watching this with a friend and I didn't pick up on it, but then she picked up on it, and when she mentioned it, I couldn't stop noticing how often Tom Skerritt was kissing Laura Flynn Boyle on the mouth.
Really?
So he was supposed to be her dad,
right,
and she was his 17-year-old daughter, but there was a lot of mouth kissing. And, their mouths were closed, but still, it was getting to be the point where this doesn't feel right to me.
Whoa, daddy.
Yeah, this family maybe seems a little bit too lovey-dovey in ways, and not lovey-dovey enough in others.
I will say this, I didn't notice it, and I'm not going to watch the movie again to see if I was right or wrong, because it's just not going to be worth my time to go down 3
you
on
can
this.
take my word for it.
I will take your word for it. Laura Flynn Boyle, the older sister, worst fucking babysitter ever. Just utter child neglect to the left and right.
Yeah, I didn't mind that so much. So Carol Ann, she has to take care of Carol Ann while the parents are downstairs at a party, but she wants to go to her friend's party, so she leaves Carol Ann on her own, and Carol Ann's like, no, go to the party. Whatever, I'm 10. I can sit alone in a hotel room by myself. And I actually didn't think there was a big problem with that. That's the kind of thing... The kind of irresponsible teenage behavior that you should expect from teenagers, and sure, ground them for a week or so when they do it, but don't be surprised.
It's like yelling at a toddler for pissing his pants. It's, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I get that.
And it's not like she left her alone in a house or a cabin in the middle of the woods or something. They were all in the same building, and they didn't know that there was a ghost, so shouldn't have been a big problem.
Anyway, this psychiatrist character who's supposedly, here to help Carol Ann and is, like, just such a preposterous, skeptical character.
He's one of the two really preposterous skeptics that we're going to encounter in these films, and he is so hostile towards her. He hates her so much. She hasn't even done anything to him, and he's just talking about how manipulative and awful this little girl is. And when things happen, like she uses her psychic powers to throw a coffee cup at a glass and break it in front of witnesses, and he's like, this was an example of the kind of mass hypnosis that this little rapscallion is so excellent at.
Absolutely no evidence could be presented to this man that would convince this that there was anything supernatural happening, even to the point of his death. I'm sure he fell down that elevator shaft, smugly certain he was correct the whole time.
Mass hypnosis. Me off this elevator shaft, will you? But yeah, like there were visitors to this school watching Carol Ann behind one-way glass, and she literally psychics a coffee cup at the glass, which shatters. And he's like, no, it's hypnosis.
Yeah.
Like, what part of that is hypnosis?
I want to give the movie credit for one kind of cool moment, I thought. Tangina returns from the previous films, the strange, squeaky voiced member of the Lollipop Guild that...
Another thing I noticed, although she is not the mother of Yeardley Smith, she could easily be the mother of Yeardley Smith,
Yes.
Lisa Simpson.
She seems to really enjoy being this powerful figure and walking around with her chin up and being very smug. And she loves Carol Ann, and she's going to come rescue her. So I thought it was kind of cool that she had a very sudden death, and that weirdly Laura Flynn Boyle's character suddenly erupted and emerged from her corpse.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
That was a fucking weird moment, but like I did not see that coming. And it was shocking, A, because Tangina was suddenly out of the picture, and then B, that I didn't see this sudden emergence happening. So I will give the movie points for that.
There don't seem to be any rules in this universe. We don't really know what it is that these ghosts are capable of, or even what things can happen in this universe. So I wasn't all that thrown by it, because the ghosts just seem to do
whatever.
Yeah, they're not even necessarily haunting ghosts. Like the whole building turns to ice, and then the boyfriend emerges out of the ice in a really hilariously overacted scene.
Yep.
And then he's fine, but then he's evil with Laura Flynn Boyle.
That was a weird, sort of untethered moment of this story too. I thought it was kind of interesting that they get Laura Flynn Boyle back, they get her boyfriend back, but no, they're not back. They're evil. We see they sort of get into the mirror and walk away with this mischievous grin. If that was the last we'd seen of Laura Flynn Boyle, I would have said that was kind of ballsy. But no, she comes back and she's rescued and she's fine. Her boyfriend, however, gone from the movie. So he's still evil and trapped in the mirrors, I'm gonna guess. It was just, we've already thought way more about this movie than anybody involved in writing it did, is my guess. So we're almost 15 minutes into this. Is there anything that we want to say more about Poltergeist 3? In the interest of voicing an unpopular opinion, I know that the actress who played Carol Ann died shortly after this. I just think she's an maybe mediocre to okay child actress. There's just something so saccharine about her delivery and her perfectly, pinched Cabbage Patch Doll cheeks that is just like, I don't know, it's almost... You know how you talked about Annabelle, the evil doll, being the perfect evil doll. In a way, she's the perfect, precocious, cute little blonde child, right?
Well, I'm going to make you feel like an asshole here, Larry. Okay. Or lay bare the fact that you are an asshole. The reason why she looked like a Cabbage Patch Doll is she was having health problems that they thought was Crohn's disease. She was all puffed up on steroids, but it was a misdiagnosis. So the thing that she actually had killed her. So she was quite sick during the filming of this, and she was on a lot of medication that was making her look a little bit puffier. Look puffy, but also... she just seemed a little bit off, and it's because she was sort of dying when they were filming this. So I hope you feel bad about yourself.
Well, I think that's probably a good way to end this review.
Well, here you go. That's where you'll be spending most of your time. The company wants us to patrol the premises every couple of hours.
The mirrors, they're so clean.
Fella who was working here before you, he was completely obsessed with these mirrors.
Anybody here? What the hell? I need you to run a name for me. He was a night watchman and I replaced him.
I don't want to die.
I just need to know how he died.
What are you talking about?
I'm seeing things. Bad things.
So Alexandre Aja, French director, sort of specializes in the horror genre. And I think he's a very technically good director. For me, it's just all the script. You know, if he has a good script on his back, he's going to probably deliver the goods. So it's not a guarantee with him, but I'm always going to check out the next Alexandre Aja film. This movie Mirrors, starring Kiefer Sutherland as a night security guard who gets, an ex-cop, come night security guard, which we can get into, who comes to look after this burnt-out, very haunted department store, which has weird supernatural shenanigans going on in the mirrors, unsurprisingly. It's a remake of a film called Into the Mirror from South Korea, but it doesn't really follow the story. It just sort of steals sort of set pieces from the original film.
And I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I haven't seen the source material, but I'm betting that the source movie was really good because it feels like there are just glimmers of greatness that Alexandre Aja seems to be trying really hard to suppress. There are some really interesting things about this movie that I think is handled ultimately kind of heavy-handed and over-directed in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing. I mean, it's a movie that I want to like. That's where I come into it, right? And it keeps on trying my patience. I think it starts pretty strong. There's a fairly shocking murder/suicide scene, depending on how you choose to interpret things. That sort of starts things off and sets you into, this is going to be a hard, brutal, R-rated movie. But the story it's telling is another one of these PG standard ghost stories, you know? Find the root of this evil, bring person A to point B, and then we'll get to the other side of it. But it's got all of these very hard R-rated set pieces. And it's also just way too long. It's 2 hours long. And I think that if they'd somehow managed to squeeze a half an hour out of it, that I'd be here saying, yes, see Mirrors. Right now I'm just sitting here saying, well, I want to be saying that I really like Mirrors.
Yeah, there were some good bits in Mirrors, but I think ultimately some of it was too familiar and some of it became ridiculous. The ending of this it just completely fell apart at the ending. We'll talk about that in a second. But there were also like the standard horror movie or ghost movie tropes, which again I don't think is so bad. It starts off with a character that he sort of fell from grace as a cop. There was a shooting and he became an alcoholic and he was trying to get his life back together. So he's working in this haunted department store. It
had had a fire 5 years previously, and they were slowly renovating to reopen, and he had to keep the lights burning at night.
But there's questions like, so why does he stay here? This is where the financial desperation can be a useless tool for these useful tool for these kind of stories. There's a point where he's like, this place is scary as shit, and his sister's like, well, why don't you just get a better job? And he says, quote, it's not that simple, and then that's the end.
Yeah.
Like, it is exactly that simple. You can get paid that much working at Starbucks. Like, the ham-fisted screenwriter wants him to be there because he has to, but it's just like, it's not that simple. Don't worry about it. Why do you stay there? Don't worry about it.
Well, here's I'm not really arguing the point, but here's what I would say if I had written this movie, why I would say he stays there. Well, A, because we needed him to stay there. But people who had positions of authority or power tend to like that. So cops who are no longer cops, tend to become security guards because they can pretend they still carry that measure of some imagined authority, right? It's sort of...
And if they kept that would have added an interesting dimension to his character,
but
because then he wouldn't have been the completely selfless, heroic dad.
Yeah.
He could be on a bit of a power trip, but they just don't bother, right?
Yeah.
They just say it's not that simple.
I think you're right. I think that the secret to this might be if maybe he wasn't a perfect man, and maybe if he was in a prison of his own making in a lot of ways, that, in a way he should have at least somewhat redeems himself by solving this very industry standard ghost puzzle. Where I will give the recommend.
But we don't even really know what he's redeeming himself from.
Well,
Sorry,
it's not really
I
clear
talked
in the
over
background. I just wanted to say some positive stuff about the movie because I feel like I'm giving this an F, and I don't think it's an entire catastrophe. There are some cool moments to it. Most famously, it'd be Amy Smart's death sequence.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite moments from any of these movies.
Right.
Do you want to
Sure.
say what it is?
We sort of understand that if you see a glitch in the mirror, if your reflection doesn't match you, if you notice something bad about the mirror, that means something bad could be happening to you. You've sort of opened yourself up to this evil force. So Amy Smart's getting ready to have a bath, and she glances at herself in the mirror and then turns away, and her reflection stays. And we follow her as she gets into the tub and sits down to relax and have a soak, and her reflection in the mirror opens her mouth, grabs her lower jaw, and just starts pulling and pulling. And we see Amy Smart receiving the injury as she tries to relax in this tub. And it's really shocking and very violent, and it's a really horrifying... what could she possibly make of this situation?
Yeah, her
what
jaw
was
just
happening
gets
to her?
ripped apart,
And
it's obviously like she's selling it so horrifying, so painful, and there's just nothing she can do. And I was half expecting when that scene was over, she'd just be lying dead in the bath, and some of that was an illusion in her head.
Nope.
But no, her jaw is just ripped off, and it's a gut-wrenching moment. And she's a character that we like too. It's heartbreaking, and she dies ignobly and really quickly.
Yeah.
Like quickly-ish in the movie. It just seems like there's more for her to do, and she's just plucked too soon.
Well, and that's a kind of thing that I like. I like when a movie gives us a character that we like so that we feel that. We get impact from the death, a wash death, for the lack of a better word, when something bad happens to him, we're like, oh, fuck, that sucks, as opposed to it's just another random asshole who gets, wiped off of the screen. And I do think that was a very, very strong sequence, like a very strong sequence in the middle of a not very strong movie.
Yeah. The other one that I thought was pretty good was when Kiefer Sutherland is using his cop connections to look at the corpse of the previous security guard who he had died looking in the first scene. He looks in the mirror, and his reflection stabs him in the throat with a piece of glass. And then in real life, the guy dies. Kiefer Sutherland looks at his corpse in the mortuary, and there's a predictable jump scare, but kind of like The Conjuring and kind of like Woman in Black. It's a predictable jump scare that works. Like
right.
you know something is going to happen. It's not even all that remarkable what happens, but for me it just worked.
Right.
In a movie where I didn't think a lot of things worked.
So yeah, I found with Mirrors personally, the deeper we got into it and the more it involved Kiefer Sutherland's son, and the more we got into this sort of conventional murder mystery or ghost mystery where he has to forcibly bring this woman who may or may not be the origin of all of this evil back to the store, the deeper into the movie, the more conventional and less interesting it became. Was basically what I was trying to say there.
Yeah, until it degenerated into an action movie at the end. Like kind of not out of nowhere exactly, but when he brings this nun who was possessed, I didn't quite fully understand how she fit in, but when she was a little girl, there was a demon in that place because it used to be a mental hospital, and it haunted her. Can you explain that better? Why it's so important?
She believed, well, she saw the evil in the mirror and tried to escape it. She's in a convent where they don't allow mirrors. All the mirrors are covered and painted over. Similar sort of attempt that Kiefer Sutherland makes to protect his son, where he and his ex-wife paint all the mirrors in the house, as if you could possibly cover every reflective surface. But
No, I got that, but the part that I was confused about was what made her so special.
I think, again, I'm just pie in the skying it here. Maybe she was the initial person that this evil was revealed to. Again, it's not really clear to me in the film itself. But she was possessed by the evil and got away. And I guess the thought was that maybe either giving the evil what it wants or bringing this, curse back to its very beginning would somehow bring it all to an end. He was pretty desperate at that point. Like, he was trying to protect his son, so I guess I'll give him points for just trying something, because what do you do? What could you possibly do to fight against something like this? But
yeah, and two things that leads to. One, a charming but sort of silly, memorable moment where Kiefer Sutherland pulls a gun on the nun to make her come back. I think maybe the movie Free Jack with Emilio Estevez is the only other movie I can recall where somebody pulls a gun on a nun. And then the other thing is when a bunch of convoluted stuff happens and he gets the nun back to the mirror factory that used to be a mental hospital, and the nun gets possessed and then starts chasing him around, it becomes a really silly action movie where he's like it just becomes a totally different movie. Anything that might have made it creepy goes away. At one point, he picks her up and stabs her on a broken steam pipe, and steam comes out of her, which was notable because that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger kills the bad guy in the movie Commando.
Yeah.
And it really wouldn't be out of place in the movie that this has now become if Kiefer Sutherland said, "Let off some steam."
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because I think it started stronger than that anyway. I'm not saying that this was going to be an amazing movie, but I think it was a movie that was full of potential.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, at the way that it ended when the factory blows up or whatever, and Kiefer Sutherland comes crawling out, and then there's this slow reveal. He's looking at first a name tag and then some writing, etc., and he notices everything's backwards, like he's in the mirror and he's not casting a reflection.
Seeing the mirror image of the world now. He's sort of trapped on the other side.
Yeah, that could have potentially been a creepy ending or an unsettling ending, but then for some reason the director decided to make this really invasive
music score.
That just, like, okay, this was going to be creepy for a second, but like the gunfight at the end, it just became loud and too much.
For me, the essential failure there is that it's supposedly a devastating ending. We should be like, oh shit, over that. Like, this is crushing, this is devastating. And for me, I was just feeling that sense of relief that I knew the credits were about to roll. Now, I know that seems... I do feel like I'm being more severe on Mirrors than I need to be. There are much worse movies than Mirrors. But I think considering the talent involved in the premise there, it's just one of those movies that should have been better than it was.
Yeah, the disappointment, and from the first scene, because the first scene was good, so it sort of set the expectations high. If it hadn't started off good, it wouldn't have been so bad when it got bad, but it's like we were lied to.
And just a quick tangent, because we probably should wrap this one up here, but the role of security guards in horror movies. Well, I mean, in a way, there's been only a handful that I can think of, like legit horror movies, that the main character is a security guard, which seems silly because that is a real scenario that happens every day where a person is in an isolated place that is very full of scary atmosphere, which could be used for scares, I think. But typically what the night security watchman is used for is like a red shirt. Some guy who's dumb, not paying attention, and gets iced before we even know his name. So, speaking as a night security guard, I think this needs to be fixed.
Stephen, are you doing this?
No.
Okay, The House on Haunted Hill. This film was produced by Robert Zemeckis as part of his Dark Castle entertainment project, where he was going to get a bunch of young directors and a bunch of producers and basically recycle old Hollywood films and bring them updated to a modern audience. This House on Haunted Hill, I believe, was the first of those and was somewhat successful in sort of bringing an old story to a new audience. I guess what I feel about this movie generally, and we can get into the plot here right away, is that it was kind of advertised as a horror movie. And to me, it's a much lighter, funner affair. So, I mean, if you went into it saying, I want to be scared, I don't know if you would like The House on Haunted Hill. But if you went into it saying, I want to be entertained, I'm going to say, maybe you will.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. It certainly exceeded my expectations, which were just rock bottom low.
Right.
It had a couple of things going against it. One of them, just personally, it was almost contemporary with a similar remake called The Haunting that came out a few months later with Liam Neeson, which was just one of the worst movies. And not even one of the worst ghost movies, just one of the worst movies.
I think
one of the worst movies of the same year that saw The Phantom Menace.
It could have been one of the worst movies of the 90s. That Haunting remake is just an abortion. It is unbelievable.
Yeah. So in my head, there was always an association between The Haunting and The House on Haunted Hill. And I'm sure they must have been filmed and in post-production at the same time, and maybe there was a lag, so they wouldn't be competing with each other. I'm not sure what. But I always just assumed this would be exactly like that. And so I was quite sure it would be the worst movie of this list. The fact that it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, I think made me think it was better than it is.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, because there's fun stuff to talk about in this movie, but I do not want to overpraise it.
No. I mean, a big red flag is one of the stars is Saturday Night Live alumnus Chris Kattan in only a semi-comical role. So at some points he's called upon to act. I'm not sure that he does a great job of that.
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of Chris Kattan anywhere lately, have we? Actually, I don't think he necessarily sucked in the movie, but I think that he is really emblematic of, that character is supposed to be terrified and supposed to be our anchor into this horrible house. And he's kind of more amusing and funny. Much like the movie, it was supposed to be scary, but it's kind of more amusing and funny. The plot centers around Jeffrey Rush, who takes the role originated by Vincent Price as this millionaire, eccentric con artist kind of guy who invites a bunch of people to see if they can stay overnight in this very haunted house. And if they can, they get $1 million out of the deal.
Yeah, can I actually cut in for a second? Because not quite a millionaire con artist. He's like an amusement park baron, if such a thing exists. He's got... He's famous for having the scariest amusement park rides, which often involve making it seem like things are going horribly wrong. So it looks like the roller coaster is going to go off the tracks, or looks like this high-rise elevator is breaking and people are falling to their death. There's the opening scene with some reporters sort of filming this amusement park. A couple of times it looks like they're going to die, which is why when I got into this the first time, or when I started watching it, I was so sure that the big reveal at the end was that there were going to be no ghosts, and this would just be a fake haunted house. But as it turns out, there were real ghosts in it.
No, I think they had to deliver on that promise somewhat.
And also,
I don't know if the film would be more or less interesting if it had all been an illusion, but...
I think I would have found it annoying.
Yeah.
It would have reminded me of... I don't know what slashers or what movies are like that. There's a slasher called April Fool's Day that was like that from the 80s. It happens from time to time where it's all one elaborate prank. Happens a lot in sitcoms and stuff. Yeah. And I would have felt a little ripped off.
Fair enough. I think that it's interesting because the Jeffrey Rush character, like you say, is almost like a circus ringleader or something like that. He sort of fills the role of this William Castle guy who produced the original film, who was not just a filmmaker but a real showman. He would do things like The Tingler, where they put electric charges in the seats of the theater to shock people while they're watching the movie. His sort of showmanship is, I think, intentionally being reflected in the Jeffrey Rush character, basically as a way to
And-
sort of pay homage to where this movie is coming from.
And Jeffrey Rush is also doing a pretty obvious impersonation of Vincent Price. You know,
Maybe
it's
a little less flaming, but yeah. But that's okay. I say that without judgment. For the most part, I think the cast is fine. It's full of, you know, pretty people of the 90s era. You know, Ali Larter, Taye Diggs, very pretty people. How good they are as actors? Well, they're not bad. They can say the lines and they don't bump into the furniture. I think the closest thing to a problematic role I find in here is Famke Johansson, who plays Jeffrey Rush's wife, who's this conniving wannabe murderess who's, you know, got her own little game going on in the backdrop of all this supernatural shenanigans. At the time, she was mainly known as being a supermodel and being beautiful, and she was, but I don't think she'd quite harnessed her acting abilities yet. She's been in movies now for almost, 15, 20 years, and I do think she's come a long way. But at this point, I think there's a little bit of camera shyness with her, for me.
I didn't find it especially jarring because I thought everybody was kind of chewing the scenery a little bit. Mentioned Chris Kattan already. Peter Gallagher was her lover, and there was sort of their separate conspiracy plot to murder Jeffrey Rush's character. Everybody just seemed to be a little bit bigger than the movie needed them to be, so I wouldn't have necessarily guessed, not knowing who she was, I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that she wasn't an actor. She seemed to be hamming it up a little bit with her, "I've always hated you.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this opportunity to murder you, and people will think it's the house."
Mm-hmm. And this was the sort of role she was doing. She played a Bond villainess and stuff like that. She was kind of playing sinister baddies at this point. But I don't know. Like, you're right. Most of the people are playing types, and they're over sort of hyping it a lot. I think they're just sort of recognizing sort of the B-movie horror history roots of this project that they're in. I also want to mention Bridget Wilson. She's not in the movie very long. She's sort of the woman who's constantly looking through her camcorder. She's unfortunately one of the first people to leave the story, but I've always thought that actress was just gorgeous. And
There's no shortage of gorgeous women in this movie.
no, it's a whole movie populated by pretty people. The closest thing to normal we get is Jeffrey Rush. You know, everybody in this movie is just gorgeous. And I've said this in other reviews in the past. When, you know, we have a cast of 8 or 10 people and all of them look like they could be strutting down a runway, after a while it just does feel like they're playing dress up to me. Like I get distracted by it. I like to have a few people in there that just look like, quote, normals, just throw us a bone here, people.
This is certainly not the kind of movie where you get lost in it. You
No.
never think, wow, this is really happening. You're always, not only are you always watching a movie, but you're always watching a very particular flavor of late 90s movie. And like, as much as Poltergeist 3 was a 1980s time capsule, it's one of the most 80s looking movies there is. This feels to me like one of the most 90s looking movies. Right down to starting off with Marilyn Manson, his Sweet Dreams song when the credits playing, which is, like, it's all right. It's not a bad song for what it is, but it's just so 90s.
Yeah.
And it has a real Scream 3 feel to it.
Yeah. Well, that's for me. Like, if someone asked me what was the most quintessential 90s movie, I would say Scream, personally. But this is definitely, in neighbors with that. But that doesn't necessarily kill it for me. In a way, you know, we're getting old enough that 90s nostalgia is going to be a thing that's happening legitimately. So, which is frightening. In the past, in this podcast, talking about ghosts, you and I have discussed a very personal pet peeve of mine, in which if a character is killed off in a movie and later shows up again as a ghost to save the day, it super pisses me off.
You know what?
Spoilers,
So you're
that
talking
exact
about,
thing happens in this movie. What's that?
Oh, you're talking about the thrilling climax with Chris Kattan, where the Chris Kattan ghost saves our two
Survivors.
best-looking protagonists.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
they
The prettiest
can-
people win.
I actually put that down, though, as one of the moments that I found in this movie, which I can't quite recommend, and I didn't like it exactly, but I found it charming for what it was. That was one of the moments that I actually didn't mind. There were a couple of moments where characters will surprise you in sort of a satisfying way. And so Chris Kattan is like this squirrely, scared guy whose family owns the house. When he dies kind of distracting the ghost in sort of this selfless act. And then when he pops up in a kind of a contrived plot, convenient way, but he sort of, as a ghost, does another sacrifice, and I don't know. I thought, okay, he's a decent guy, even in the afterlife. He's more than it would seem. And that one of the reasons why I didn't find that jarring is because as much as Jeffrey Rush and his wife hated each other and were trying to kill each other throughout, when he found out that there was a ghost, even when he knew that his wife was trying to kill him and he was confronting her about it, he actually I don't think he sacrificed himself, but he actually tried to save Evelyn, which I thought was this really oddly human moment.
Well, and one point I will give the movie is that they do establish if people die in the house that we may or may not see them or hear them again. It's not unprecedented within the realm of the story. After Famke Johansson's dead, we sort of hear her voice again through the ghosts and whatnot. So it's established. I'm just saying it's a personal pet peeve of mine. As a device in any ghost movie, you're going to lose points with me if you do that. And here it is, once again, rearing its ugly head. I'm not enthusiastic about House on Haunted Hill, but I'm kind of glad that you're on the same page as me, because I thought this was going to be another one of the reviews where I was being really embarrassed and apologetic. It was like, yeah, I know it's silly. It is silly. Sometimes I like silly. There's better silly movies than this, but there's a whole lot worse as well. This is like right in that middle ground. It's totally and completely okay.
Well, and that makes it, that's of the most damning praise you could give it.
Yeah.
Because really bad movies can be fun to watch because they're really bad, and obviously good movies you'll want to watch, but it's the kind that you should actually just probably not watch it unless you're doing your friend's podcast or something.
Or if you're just bonkers for ghost movies, right? But I would just set the precedent or set the table by saying you're not going to be scared by this movie, but you'll probably be entertained by it, and you'll probably forget it by the next day.
Or if you're doing your ironing or something and it's on TV, you could let it go. You could watch it. You'll probably be, kind of amused by it.
Yeah.
It's, there was one good, I wouldn't call it a scare because there are no scares in this, I think we'll agree. But in the fake amusement parks that this Vincent Price character runs, in the background he's got this technician that makes it look, he's keeping all of the wheels in motion. And for a long time it seems like, I keep bouncing between Jeffrey Rush and Vincent Price.
Yeah.
We'll call him Jeffrey Rush. He, for a long time, thinks that these are fake tricks that he's controlling with the house. So at one point, he goes back to check up on his engineer guy, whose face has been, carved out of his head.
Yeah.
I think that was quite a surprising scene, and
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the better deaths of the... I guess it's not a death, but we don't see it, but it's one of the better shots, I thought.
Yeah, there's moments. Jeffrey Rush being thrown into that hyper-stimulating machine where he's just inundated with images and basically driven insane. Or the sequence where we see at least a vision of the Taye Diggs character jumping into this huge boiling cauldron of blood.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was not bad.
It was kind of an interesting image. I mean, it didn't pay off necessarily, but there are moments.
And I actually thought that he might be dead in that scene because he was the black guy, and this was still of the era where the black guy gets killed off first.
No, Matt, he was way too good looking to die. Way too good looking to die. And that's the kind of movie we're talking about here. So
yeah, and also we're talking about the kind of movie where at the end, Taye Diggs and the gorgeous blonde woman whose
Ali
name
Larder.
escapes me, they escape through a window and they get out into the sunlight where the ghost can't get them, and they're at the top of this really huge Art Deco building. I think it's Art Deco. And he says something like, that's a hell of a party.
Yeah.
And people just died.
Yeah.
Really traumatic things just happened. You
Yeah.
didn't need to have that flippant line. which would have been the worst line of the movie had she not said jokingly, "How do we get down from here?" Which is a super legit question.
Absolutely.
They're at the top of a building. They're gonna either die of exposure or fall. I don't know how they would get down.
Two skeletons sitting next to each other, perched outside of a window.
That could almost be a scarier movie that just starts with them at the top of this building and what they think they've escaped something and now they're in a much worse situation.
Now we work backwards.
Houses are alive. If we're quiet, if we listen, we can hear houses breathe. We say haunted, but we mean the house has gone insane.
From the imagination of Stephen King comes a disturbing new epic tale.
There are rumors that you're planning a scientific investigation of Rose Red this summer, a sort of psychic field trip. Is that true?
For Professor Joyce Reardon,
My goal is modest. A single twitch.
It's time to stop the silliness.
the truth is out there.
When I come back from Rose Red with proof, you will...
It's sleaze. It's a spit in the eye of rational thought.
Now she has assembled a team of gifted psychics
Hello, are you the group?
I think we're ready.
to unravel the secret
Waking up Rose Red is not a good idea.
Rose Red is a dangerous place.
that was built to last.
Rose Red was built by John P. Rimbauer. What makes Rose Red one of the world's most fascinating psychic artifacts is that after 1950, Rose Red grew on its own. Follow me and prepare to be amazed.
So I have a weird fascination, and I'll even say love, for Stephen King. I've read a lot of his books. I couldn't say all of them because I have to do other things with my life. But I do consider myself a fan while acknowledging that he's sometimes problematic. But I'm a fan of him as a writer of novels and short stories. I do not think having Stephen King necessarily as your screenwriter is a good thing. That said...
Maximum Overdrive?
Maximum Overdrive. There's plenty of examples. That said, the way some people have a weird affection for, like, I don't know, Star Trek The Next Generation, which, if we're real, just isn't a good show, or for, I don't know, some derivative 90s TV show. I kind of have this weird fascination for all of these made-for-TV adaptations of Stephen King that happened throughout the 90s. This Rose Red movie we're going to talk about was actually in 2002, but throughout the 90s you were basically getting these Coles Notes PGized versions of Stephen King. They're basically making Stephen King, which is absolutely horrifying, accessible to a TV audience. And I don't know, I've always enjoyed watching them especially when they were airing, I would get really excited about them. And I have this weird affection for them, even though I know a lot of them are bad. We reviewed Sometimes They Come Back, and it was just an atrocious movie. But for some reason I enjoyed watching it. I don't know what that says about me. So when we come to this Rose Red miniseries, which was aired over 3 nights, and as we watch it now, that gets to almost 4.5 hours of running time. Basically, we have Stephen King's take on The Haunting of Hill House, basically. He's riffing on that. And he brings a huge cast of characters, and in his typical television adaptation ways, he says, TV giveth in giving him more length and more room to tell the story that he wants, but it taketh away in his ability to use the level of violence and language and sex or whatever that he would typically do. And so what we get here is sort of a friendlier, cuddlier Stephen King. All of this preamble leading us to the front doors of Rose Red, which is not good. But that's where I come in. I come into this as a fan of Stephen King, even as a fan of his shitty TV movies, as a person who wants to like this. And I don't.
I think you might have kind of nailed it when you were talking about your introduction with Stephen King's 90s adaptations, which were just all over TV throughout the 90s. Rose Red feels like it's behind its time, that it should have been released 5 or 6 years earlier. It feels like a 90s movie that was made too late.
Yeah.
And so it's just got that 90s TV aesthetic, which it doesn't work at this point.
Yeah. It's not scary. And worse than that, I think that it is a mix of borrowed elements. Stephen King is left and right stealing from either himself or from Shirley Jackson or from genuinely interesting historical things. You know about, I believe it's the Remington? Winchester House, yeah. This woman believed that she was going to be haunted by all the people who died from Winchester rifles, but she somehow thought that they could only haunt your house if you were living in a completed house. So her house never finished construction. That's something that's borrowed in Rose Red. The opening of the movie where we have a psychic child causing a rain of rocks to fall on a house after she's been bitten by a dog is ripped right out of the pages of Carrie. This character that we have of this unbelievable mother's boy who has hidden sort of talents is Harold Lautner from The Stand, just repurposed in another story. We're seeing other characters ripped out of other stories and thrown into this significantly less interesting one.
Yeah, one of the things that I appreciated about this for a while, and maybe I don't have the encyclopedic knowledge of Stephen King that you do, so there's like an ensemble group of psychics in this obviously haunted house, and I thought it was kind of interesting to see their dynamics play off of each other for a while. So this was almost 4 hours. I watched it over the course of a night, and then the next morning when I went to bed after 2 hours, I was still kind of, I didn't love it, but I was still kind of into it because I thought the characters were interesting enough in their ways. Some of their dynamics were okay. The character that you're talking about, Emery, who is the nerd psychic, I thought he was overacting a little bit too much.
Agreed.
Sometimes he managed to reel it in a little bit, but mostly I think he was overplaying the character. But he was still kind of interesting to me. I was curious to see where he would go, if he was going to be secretly a helpful character, secretly a hindrance. And one of the nice things we could say about this is, even though he was too much at times, and a lot of times, I thought his character arc was kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, and I think that this type of character is something that Stephen King really likes, right? This nerdy, misunderstood, intelligent, but, flawed character.
Yeah, and kind of like a bully and a victim of bullying.
Yeah, he's a bully because he had been a victim, basically.
Yeah. But the first time we're introduced to him, he's a psychic that's going to go to this house, and he's at home eating whipped cream out of the fridge, and then he turns around, and all of the fridge is just covered in blood, and there's horrible apparitions coming out, and he seems sort of annoyed, and he tells them not to bother him because he needs the money, so don't try to scare me away. I'm going to get paid $5,000 to investigate this house. And I kind of liked that moment. I thought it was a scare that seemed not scary to me, a little bit heavy-handed, so I liked the way that he was just sort of disinterested in it.
I like, again, I get that I've seen that character before and done better. That's sort of where I begin and end with Emery. Some of the more problematic things, too, is, for me, the main character, played by Nancy Travis, her Dr. Joyce Reardon. She's supposed to have this huge sort of tragic arc where she is sort of driven insane by this need to prove this supernatural stuff. And I've seen Nancy Travis in other movies. I've got a soft spot for So I Married an Axe Murderer, and I don't think she's a bad actress, but I'm kind of embarrassed for her in some of the scenes in this movie. And I don't even think it's her fault. I think some of the dialogue is just ear crushing.
I think whoever was directing this, he was getting them to overact, because she was overacting. The crusty old head of her department.
Yeah.
She's a professor of psychology, is it?
Yeah.
And her department head thinks that she's wasting money and wants to deny her tenure, have her tenure revoked. He was just way too evil, way too obtuse. Very similar, actually, to the psychiatrist in Poltergeist 3. Both of them were they were being pushed I assume by the directors, to go past the point of skepticism right to outright hostility.
The ghost should be enough of a villain. We don't need to bring in these extra outside sources of villains. And again, this is Stephen King stealing from himself, right? The interesting thing about that, too, Matthew, is that the actor who was playing the Mr. Cooper character at the university died midway through the production. He had a heart attack playing tennis, dropped dead. So his whole closing element that was going to be happening in the second act had to be retrofitted, and all of a sudden Emery's mother started to take a bigger role in the
that makes sense.
in the later part of it. So some of the problems with Rose Red didn't necessarily have to do with, you know, the writing of the production. When you're halfway through this, you know, huge production and you lose one of your cast members, that's really hard to course correct. It's not an excuse, it's a reason. It's a reason, you know, or one of the reasons why I think this thing falls.
Could be. I mean, I think he was overacting anyway.
Agreed.
As was sort of everybody in this. One of the bright shining spots was Melanie Linsky.
Yay!
Who is... I just rewatched her first movie, Heavenly Creatures, the Peter Jackson movie, which was so good that
it's an amazing
she
movie.
Still has, after all of those years on 3.5 Men or 2.5 Men, she still hasn't burnt all of her goodwill.
No.
I still like seeing her in things.
Every now and then I'll bump into Melanie Linsky, and I'm always happy to see her. And again, she's got a fairly thankless role here, but I think she does well with it.
Yeah, and she's, I think, the only character or the only actor that's not overacting in this movie. I think her performance is appropriate.
Yeah.
She's the older sister of... talking about pet peeves.
The autistic child.
Younger sister is autistic in that... I would say it's very 90s, but I think it still goes on, where people's understanding of autism is that it's kind of a superpower, and so she's like autistic in this really lame filmic kind of way. So I thought the younger sister, who again, child actor, I think with not a very good actor's director, she does what she can, but I thought Melanie Linsky as the older sister did a pretty good job.
Yeah, and it's another one of those really cringy things with the autistic kid or whatever, that she's basically as, quote, autistic as she needs to be in any given scene.
Yeah,
Like,
she gets less autistic when she deals with the handsome hero.
Yeah. Matt Kiesler, the, quote, handsome hero who's hooked up romantically with the Nancy Travis character, is another actor who I like and I think is decent, who's once again trapped in a movie that's not so great, which seems to be Matt Kiesler's lot in life. Some of Stephen King's dialogue that, when you read it in a book, it would be fine, you know, Russian hand and Roman fingers, or just weird turns of phrase that he likes to use and repeat. I find a lot of times in the books, you can sort of auto-correct it in your own brain to make it work. But when he tries to ham-fistedly squeeze that into a screenplay, it's way worse in the televised TV version of The Shining. But there's some of it going on in here too, where people say things to themselves or just generally that just nobody would say that. Nobody would ever talk that way to themselves or anyone else. It breaks any reality to it.
Also, at the beginning of every episode, there's a shot of the house where Nancy Travis does some ominous voiceover.
Right.
And some of the stuff she says is just ridiculous. I wrote down this one line, and she's like, I guess saying these profound aphoristic things that don't make sense. She says, as our bodies grow old, so too do our houses. Like, yeah, okay.
You mean everything gets older at the same time?
Actually, your body gets, it seems to get withered quicker than a house would, but, I mean, sure, who would disagree? Time passes, and so that happens to houses.
Yeah.
But it's just filled with it. Like, if you just ran together all of her voiceover dialogue, it would just be, I don't know what, 5 minutes of just what the fuck aphorisms, stuff that's not necessarily not true, but is not worth saying.
And the time that we spent setting up all of these different psychic investigators and how they have different things. The one woman, of the family tree of Deschanel, whenever she touches an object, she can sort of find out things about the past. Or another woman has this writing skills where she can write and communicate to the ghosts. And the older fellow has this precognition where he can sort of anticipate things that are going to happen a few seconds before they do. But They don't do anything with those few characters. They spend a lot of time setting them up, but once they're in the house, they're either just wiped off the table right away or in a different room for the bulk of this what we're shown. So, I don't know. It's another one of these movies that I feel the potential to the left and right. I don't think the cast sucks, but I think that they're having a real hard time. And 4.5 hours, it's kind of punishing. But here's the weird thing,
I don't think that's really that fair to criticize its length, because, I mean, it is a mini-series, right?
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't criticize the bad season of American Horror Story because it's 13 hours or whatever.
Well, I guess I see what you're saying, but the weird thing to me is that I'm saying all of these terrible things about Rose Red, and I've gone through that journey. This was probably my 4th or 5th time. And I know, for some fucking reason, maybe not soon, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, I'll get it into my head that maybe I should give Rose Red another try. Maybe this time it will be the movie I hope it to be. I have a problem when it comes to Stephen King, but I don't not to the point where I'll make excuses for it, right? Much the way a Star Trek fan loves the Star Trek The Next Generation or loves the original series, but in their heart will concede that there's a lot of shit there. I love Stephen King, but there's a lot of shit there. And as example, Rose Red.
After having watched the first 2 episodes of this, kind of binge watching it one night, starting at around midnight, so I was getting pretty sleepy, I kind of wanted to put in the last disc and see how things played out. So there's not really much good that I can say about it exactly, but
it keeps you watching it.
Watching it, I didn't like the way it ended. Excuse me. The last disc the last episode was certainly the weakest, but there was something, I don't know what it was, some sort of X factor that was kind of interesting. Another thing about the characters, there was the handsome British guy from Arachnophobia, who's, I think he was also Warlock in the Warlock movie.
Julian Sands is his name.
He was really interesting too in some ways with his dynamic with Emery, because he was like sort of handsome, kind of heroic, really nice to the autistic girl, but mean to Emery, meaner than he had to be. Emery was kind of mean to the autistic girl, so Julian Sands was kind of defending her, but then his behavior went full on into bullying behavior as well. So their dynamic was kind of interesting, and I just liked watching the way the characters played off of each other.
Yeah. I was saying that I think that Julian Sands actually, performance-wise, can hold his head relatively high. He didn't have as many tough lines to choke out as some of the other ones, but as a rule, I've never been a huge Julian Sands fan, so I kind of was surprised that I liked his character as much as I did, comparably anyway. What I will say about Rose Red is this: for as long as it does hold my attention, and I have watched it several times. And as a piecemeal, if somebody wasn't into Stephen King, they could watch this, and unbeknownst to them, they're getting a little piece of Carrie, and they're getting a little piece of The Shining, and they're getting little pieces of other things from the Stephen King universe that I think are legit and interesting. They're just way more legit and interesting in the source material than they're ever going to be in a made-for-TV movie. And so it was, we came to the point where we're going to rank these 6 ghost movies. And this is your 4th round of doing ghost movies. And how does this bunch stack up? I think maybe last time we had a maybe slightly better list overall.
Yeah, this movie, unlike last time, it doesn't have something great like Devil's Backbone. But there's nothing in it that's terrible. Well, I mean, I think Poltergeist 3 is objectively terrible, but I didn't mind watching it.
Yes. I didn't find them, for the most part, to be that hard to watch. I mean, the length of Rose Red is somewhat punishing, but like I said in the review, despite all of these problems I had, I still watched all 4.5 hours of it. So I guess that's points for something. But
yeah, and this is certainly better than the first two lists I did for you. If this had continued along those lines, I probably wouldn't be a guest again. But, things are looking up a little bit.
It's funny, because in the first episode, I'd offered you an entirely different list that had, like, The Sixth Sense and Session 9 and The Original Haunting, and it was, like, kind of an embarrassment of riches, and you slapped that down. So I said, oh, okay, well, then do this one, asshole. But here we are with your 4th episode on the subject of ghosts, and I am curious to hear how you're going to rank these bitches.
All right, so starting at the bottom, I think probably no surprises here. The lowest ranking movie will be Poltergeist 3. I am kind of charmed by it on a personal level, but it's objectively bad, and probably nobody should watch it.
Okay.
So, number 6 is Poltergeist 3. Number 5, Rose Red. Although I did say it's not fair to judge it by its length because it was a mini-series, it does, start wearing on you after a while. There are things about it that aren't so bad, but I wouldn't recommend Rose Red either, so I would put it at number 5. Number 4 is Mirrors, which had continued on the trajectory that it did, that it started on, would have ranked much higher. But I don't know, when his kid starts getting too precocious, talking to things in the mirror, and things get long and boring, and then it becomes an action movie for some reason, and the music gets too bombastic, etc., etc., it just starts to fall apart. So Mirrors could have been a better movie than it is, but it makes the bottom of the list. The top 3, number 3, House on Haunted Hill, which I'm not 100% sure if I would recommend it to somebody, but I kind of enjoyed watching it, and I don't think it's all that punishing for somebody. If somebody wants to give it a look, you won't love it, but you won't hate it.
Yeah, you won't necessarily regret your time spent.
Yeah. Number 2, Woman in Black. I thought it could have been a better movie than it was, probably with a different actor, if the main character wasn't quite so mopey, but it had so much going for it. It was just such a nice classic ghost movie. I would say it's worth watching. Which brings us to number 1, Conjuring. Although we discussed this at length, there were times when the creepiness or the scariness gave way to sort of familiarity, and things got to be a little bit too much. The moments that were scary were really freaking scary, and when the director was handling the ghosts with a light touch, doing the shadows and just a little bit of music, and the actors were really doing a great job. This was the only movie where I actually was scared a few times watching it, so I would put it at number 1.
Very good. So you said you were confident you knew where we were going to disagree. I'm just curious, where do you think we disagree?
I think we got our number 1 and 2 flipped.
Yeah, but we didn't. You actually just won.
I did.
You just won the first ranking review.
Wow.
Congratulations.
I want to thank Larry and God, and most especially Karen Giese.
Matt, can I tell you something?
What's that?
It's going to be a spoiler. The previous episode to this, Karen Giese won her 2nd episode of Ranking Review. We've just had 2 winners in a row. After 60 straight episodes of nobody winning Ranking Review, we just had 2 episodes in a row where people won. But unfortunately, Karen's still going to be gloating because she now has 2 wins to your 1. But
2 wins and a 6 for 6 wrong, although I do have the belt.
Right. Well, I just want to say, yeah, I agree, but I'm going to go through this really quickly anyway. Poltergeist 3 is clearly the worst of these movies. I, again, have a personal nostalgia for the 80s horror movies, and it's not a great sequel, but it is a watchable thing. If you like the Poltergeist universe, be my guest. I would be very surprised that anybody who didn't grow up in the era or grow up with that franchise would be at all interested in this. So, down she goes. That was the closest thing we came to disagreeing, because I almost put Rose Red at the bottom, but there was more driving me to keep watching in Rose Red than there was in Poltergeist 3. So in spite of its length and in spite of some of the wonky acting, it managed to be second from the bottom. Good for it. Yes, Mirrors in fourth position because of the frustrating potential that was there and the lack of delivery on that potential. House on Haunted Hill sort of defied my expectations. That was another one I thought that you might just hate. I think this is one of those things that if it catches you on the right day, you might actually really enjoy it. Or if you caught it on the wrong day, you might just find it toxic. So
yeah, I think it actually helped the order that I watched it in, because after some more trying movies, like after spending 4 hours on Rose Red, it's like a nice palate cleanser.
I put The Woman in Black in second place, even though, like, when I was talking about the movie, I do have a lot of love for the source material. I like the vision of this ghost in the funeral garb. I think it's creepy, and it's definitely more in my wheelhouse as far as, like, the moldy old mansions, period ghost movies. And honestly, I probably will rewatch The Woman in Black maybe more than I watched The Conjuring, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that The Woman in Black is a better movie than The Conjuring. I think that The Conjuring really achieves some magic, and again, it's this James Wan thing. It's like all of these elements we've seen before, but it's working, and it's working well, and it's scary. I do think that the later into the movie we go, the less scary and the more familiar it becomes, but it's a solid box office. It was a solid box office hit for a reason. I don't think it's up there with like some of the high watermarks of horror, but I understand why it was a big hit, and I will watch the sequel. So in this batch of movies, for sure, yeah, The Conjuring is number one, and Matthew Risling, new rank and review champion.
Yeah.
So it's been a while since we've done some proper Jerry's, god damn it. So we're going to do some Jerry's this episode. And our new freshly minted champion has made some selections. So I'm going to try and guess where these awards are going to land. I'm going to use my knowledge of Matthew Risling against him. So where do you want to start with today's Jerry's, my friend?
So I think we're going to do mostly familiar ones.
Okay.
We're going to do 3 that are very common: the best scare, the best death, of course, the ever-popular WTF moment. And then the 4th category, which works well for this particular group of films, is the most pointless fake ending in a ghost movie.
Okay.
So, starting with best scare.
Best sort of boo moment.
Yep.
I mean, there's good ones throughout, especially the top 2 movies, Woman in Black and The Conjuring. And even though it was spoiled in the trailer, I cannot overemphasize how strong the clapping game was in The Conjuring for me. So I'm going to say the second time we see the clapping ghost next to Lily Taylor in the stairwell for best scare. But that's my guess.
That was the very, very close runner-up.
Okay.
Obviously, my favorite one was the one that I've spent the most time talking about in The Conjuring, but it's the 2 little girls in the bedroom.
Right.
With just that look of abject terror on the older daughter's face. But the clapping game is a really close second.
It's pretty strong. It's pretty strong.
So you're a loser so far.
Loser!
Let's see if you can pull up your socks a little bit, Larry. Best death.
I think this might be an easy one, Matt.
I think it's an easy one.
My knee-jerk response is Amy Smart in Mirrors, having her jaw rended from her face.
It is obviously Amy Smart in Mirrors.
I'm a big wiener.
Even if you don't want to watch the movie, I assume that scene's on YouTube or something. I think you should check that out.
It really is. There's a couple of really grisly death scenes in that movie that are really well done, but seem like they belong in a different movie somehow.
WTF moment.
Oh, goodness.
Which is another one where I've got a pretty strong runner-up.
That scene in Poltergeist 3, I gotta say, where Laura Flynn Boyle erupts from the corpse of Tangina was pretty fucked up. Like, I could not have anticipated that happening. I'd be tempted to go there, but I know there's probably some really obvious thing that I'm missing. So what was your choice?
Yeah, my two choices, both things that I've mentioned already. The winner was at the end of House on Haunted Hill, where they're on top of that tall building, and they're about to die of exposure, presumably, and our hero says glibly, "That was a hell of a party," with just absolutely no respect to what they've gone through.
That's your what the fuck moment? Okay.
Although the runner-up were Tom Skerritt kissing his daughter on the mouth too frequently for my comfort in Poltergeist 3 in a way that doesn't get addressed.
Fair enough. Like I said, I could rewatch Poltergeist 3 to investigate this, but I just don't want to watch Poltergeist 3 again. So I'm going to take your word for that one.
And number 4, the pointless fake-out endings.
Pointless fake-out endings.
Or another way to phrase that would be endings where the ghost shows up after the movie's over because they want to keep it open for a sequel.
It's all over, or is it?
Yes.
Oh God, I don't know. Maybe Poltergeist 3 because of how saccharine it was at the very end. Everybody was so in love with each other. I've saved the day because I've proved to you that I love you. We're gonna be best friends forever. And then the slow pan out from the building. Dun dun dun. But I don't think that's the one you're going for.
No, but that was my strong runner-up for an honorable mention, because the problem was so clearly resolved. It had been taken towards the light, the ghost was gone, and he wasn't even angry. He just wanted to be taken into the light, so he's fine. So why is there that evil laugh at the end?
No good reason.
So very pointless. Obviously, they had Poltergeist 4 in mind until they saw the box office.
Oh, and I also want to take this opportunity before you move on, sorry Matt, to say that I did not mean to make a punchline out of that child's death. Just in case anybody misconstrued that. I honestly didn't know her chubby cheeks were part of an ailment. To quote from Dusk Till Dawn, I may be a bastard, but I'm not a fucking bastard. Okay.
Oh, I was just breaking your balls about that. I mean, it's true, but it's not your fault.
I'm glad to hear that. So what was your most troublesome ending then?
The most pointless scare was the Annabelle doll at the end of The Conjuring.
Right.
When we see that doll and then the music tells us it's haunted, but we knew it was haunted. It would be surprising if it wasn't haunted. That's why it's there. There is no indication that this doll would not be haunted, or that anything that happened with this Conjuring family had anything to do with whether or not this doll is haunted.
Oh no. And that was all just selling tickets for Annabelle that was going to be coming out next year. That was pretty unabashed salesmanship there. But it didn't spoil the meal. I still think definitely check out The Conjuring. Definitely check out The Woman in Black. The rest of them, I think, if you listen to this podcast, you'll probably know if it's something you'll like or not. So,
yeah.
Another solid ghost episode with my dear friend Matthew Risling, talking to us all the way from the big shitty of Toronto. Is there anything you want to say to bring us out here, brother?
No, just that I'm looking forward, I guess, in scare quotes, to the next and hopefully final Poltergeist installment, whenever it is that I do my next episode. And
yes,
then,
we still have that remake to deal with. Coming soon, kiddies.
And then maybe I'll change my list of topics, or I'll try to shake things up. But I guess I will be defending my title, presumably, with another list of ghost stories sometime in the 2016.
Can't wait, brother. Thanks so much. There was 60 straight episodes of Rank and Review wherein there was no honest champion for Rank and Review crowned again. And now we have witnessed 2 episodes in a row where my guest has gone 6 for 6. Have we opened a new door into to Rank and Review history, where all of a sudden we're going to be passing the crown from episode to episode? I don't know, and I guess neither do you, but the only way to find out is to keep listening. I hope you enjoyed episode 64 of Rank and Review Ghosts 5. You can send me feedback at rankandreview@gmail.com. That's RANKNREVIEW. Let me know how you would rank the movies. Let me know if I was right or wrong about any of the movies. Let me know about movies you want me to talk about. Any feedback would be welcome. Also, please stop by that Facebook page and throw me a like. Thank you, Rank and Review fans, and if you could do me that favor of a couple of mouse clicks, or just spreading the word on the podcast to the other film freaks in your life, I would genuinely appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who enjoys the podcast, and I certainly do hope you continue to. My name is Larry Parsons. I'm your host and Random Canadian. And until next time, thank you for listening to Rank and Review.